Ankara Bilkent University graduate Yagmur Ahmet Guldere joined the diplomatic service in 1997. The young diplomat worked in Turkey's missions in Syria, the EU, Iraq, and Russia, and later in a senior position at the Eastern Europe Department. Since the beginning of 2019, the diplomat has presented his credentials as the ambassador of Turkey to Ukraine.
I did start working on bilateral issues with Ukraine back in 2016, along with your previous ambassador in Ankara, Mr. Korsunski, who now heads the Diplomatic Academy, and your current ambassador, Andrei Sibiha. We were working very closely, and we held a number of events which brought Turkish-Ukrainian relations closer. We had the pleasure of hosting a number of prominent Ukrainian guests as well. In addition to presidents and prime ministers and other ministers, we also had guests like Mr. Pristaiko in his previous capacities, who is now the foreign minister, and Mr. Zhovkva, who is now the deputy head of administration. It was a very good start for me. Before coming here, I already got in touch with many very important and very friendly partners from Ukraine, and that connection is helping me a lot in my duties here.
In 2012, Ukraine and Turkey established strategic partnerships. Both countries have repeatedly supported one another in international organizations. One of the tools for implementing this strategic partnership was the regular meeting of the Strategic Council at the highest level.
Overall, relations between Turkey and Ukraine are excellent. We have been cooperating very closely in various areas. We have established a strategic partnership between our countries. Turkey and Ukraine believe in the future of their bilateral cooperation. They see a great potential. They believe that the trade figures can go far higher than this. This year, we expect our president to come here for the Strategic Council. But these strategic councils aren't the only venues where our presidents get together. As you know, President Zelensky was in Ankara in August this year. So this also shows that, yes, we have the strategic partnership, we have the mechanisms, but our relations are even bigger than our strategic partnership. I think both parties, both Ukraine and Turkey, is feeling very ambitious and is feeling very energetic about the future of our bilateral cooperation.
Today, Turkey is among the top 10 trading partners of Ukraine and is in 6th place in terms of agricultural exports. The current level of turnover is $4 billion. However, the trading potential of both countries is quite a bit higher.
Our current trade is something about $4 billion. And this, I think, is far below what we could do together. Presidents themselves, they declared the target. They said the trade should reach $10 billion as soon as possible. And I think we can do that very easily. Almost every day we have Turkish companies visiting the embassy, visiting the trade attaché, asking business opportunities here. And President Zelensky in Turkey, he went to Istanbul as well after Ankara, and he invited Turkish business to Ukraine, both in terms of trade and in terms of investment. So I think the figures will keep going higher. Now for that, of course, we have to conclude this free trade agreement. Ukrainian and Turkish economies on various sectors complement one another. You have things which we don't produce, and we have things which you don't produce. On those things, the job is easy. But there are also some sectors where you are too strong and Turkish economy is vulnerable, and vice versa. Some Ukrainian business communities, they feel threatened by this free trade agreement with Turkey. And there are people in Turkey who have their concerns about a possible free trade agreement with Ukraine. Now, these, of course, concerns are valid. These relate to everyday lives of people. This relates to jobs. So, of course, we have to respect these sensitivities. But if you ask me, I think we have to look at the bigger picture here. If we want to take our trade relations to the next level, we have to find a compromise. between the two parties. This was exactly what President Zelensky said in Turkey. He said, kazan kazan, the Turkish words for win-win solutions. He used these words in Turkey, and that was a very positive signal to all Turkish economy people.
Crimean Tatars have always played the role of a bridge between Turkey and Ukraine. Today, the Crimean Tatar diaspora in Turkey is made up of more than 7 million people. Following the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine and Turkey have shared concerns about forced Crimean migrants. The Turkish Mutual Assistance and Coordination Agency of the Republic of Turkey and Ukraine plays a major role in organizing humanitarian aid and other social projects.
Crimean Tatar issue is something that's very, let's say, deep-rooted for us, because as you know, Crimean Tatars are basically a Turkic community. They have been coming to Anatolia starting from the end of 18th century. There's almost no family in Turkey who cannot find the Crimean Tatar root in their ancestral links. I will include myself in this category as well. My mother can cook çiğ börek, so that's something very important and delicious. Since Crimea and Crimean Tatars has been a part of our history, what goes on in Crimean Peninsula has always been followed very closely by Turkey. Unfortunately, Crimean Tatars are a community which has been treated very harshly over the last centuries. After they were starting to wrap up the wounds of the deportation tragedy, they faced another difficulty. And yes, many Crimean Tatars came homeless to Ukrainian mainland, many went to Turkey. We are doing our best to help them to alleviate their pains. We are very closely working with the Crimean Tatar leadership here in Kiev. We are working on various projects in other parts of Ukraine as well. TİKA is Turkish development agencies using various projects, but here let me also emphasize that TİKA is not working only on Crimean Tatars. It's realizing many projects overall in Ukraine. For instance, in Lviv, they have been working on a facility for the elderly. But that aside, housing, a place where they can do their religious services, employment, they have lots of issues. We have been trying to find mutual solutions along with the Ukrainian government for these. As you know, Turkey has not recognized the illegal annexation of Crimea, and we have not changed that position since 2014. That will continue to be the case, and we will continue to support our Crimean Tatar brothers along with the assistance of Ukrainian government.
In 2018, a new record was recorded in tourism between the two countries. Over 1.4 million Ukrainians visited Turkish resorts. In addition to the popular resorts of Antalya in the year 2000, Ukrainians are discovering new destinations: Cappadocia, Muglu, and Istanbul.
One thing that makes me happy is Ukrainian tourists are no longer going exclusively to Antalya. We also have a number of other tourism areas for the summer. We are increasing winter tourism. We are developing health tourism. Some Ukrainians are going to Turkey for various health services being provided in Turkey. So I think this is something that's moving our relations in a very positive manner. And those people who get to know the other people actually make the greatest bridge between our countries. People-to-people connection is actually what matters. So that's why the tourism cooperation between Turkey and Ukraine is what makes me the happiest here. Last year we were close to 1.4 million from Ukraine to Turkey. I think this year we expect an increase about 10%, and the figure will reach 1.5 million. Before going into all these economic dimensions and cultural and touristic issues, I think tourism is the biggest investment that we are making for the future of our countries. Because Turkey is no longer an obscure country on the other side of the Black Sea for Ukrainians. Those Ukrainians who come to Turkey, they just don't enjoy the sun and the beach and the sea and everything, but they get to know us. They get to know what Turkish people look like. What's this famous Turkish hospitality? How Turkish coffee and lokum. So we're taking things to the next level. The same is valid for Turkish tourists who come to Ukraine. I think we expect more than 300,000 Turks to Ukraine. this year. And those who come don't just come to Kyiv. They go to Lviv, they go to Odessa, they go to other parts. And this is very important because knowing each other is actually creating an interest in the language and culture of the other. Now, unlike Ukraine, where Turkish history and culture is being studied academically in a very strong fashion, I really admire that. In Turkey, unfortunately, we are lagging behind on that. The Ukrainian linguistic studies have very recently started, but I think it made a very strong start, and we are going in the right direction.
In 1914, representatives of the Union of Liberation of Ukraine visited Constantinople, where they signed the so-called Talat Bey's Declaration. It was the first international document in Ukraine's recent history, according to which Ukraine had the right to create an independent state. Turkey was one of the first to establish diplomatic relations with the Ukrainian People's Republic.
Anatolia has been a most prominent cradles of civilization on a global scale. Turkey is based on this rich history, the combination of various cultures. It's like the best of many different civilizations. When you go to Turkey, you will see that in Eastern Anatolia, for instance, the kitchen is different, the local traditions are different, the dresses, even the folklore dances are different. 100 kilometers from there, you have our Black Sea coast, where you face entirely different things. In Southeast, for instance, where the summers are very hot, you can see people eating it with extra chili kebabs, while on the western coast in Aegean, they prefer greeneries and seafood far better, and they cook it better, of course. While Ankara and Istanbul, they seem to be where everything gets fused. We had the chance to host various cultural groups, and we still host many cultural groups of different backgrounds. Cuisine, culture, folkloric dances. We have something to offer to any Ukrainian of any taste.
The Ukrainian diaspora in Turkey is more than 35,000 people. Since 2008, the Ukrainian Cultural Society was established thanks to the efforts of the Ukrainian Embassy in Istanbul. And in 2017, the Ukrainian Union opened in Ankara and the Ukrainian Relief Society in Istanbul. Ukrainians living in Turkey are ready to share their own cultural traditions and hold various events for Turkish friends. From culinary evenings with the participation of the best chefs of Ukraine to scientific conferences and charity fairs.
Kahve. Maidan, the famous Maidan, is a Turkish word. You have many similar words, but I think the meaning behind the words is what actually connects us. Of course, when you look at the history, we also see other prominent figures such as Roxolana, the famous connection between Turkey and Ukraine, but there are also other connections, more unknown connections. For instance, in the Hotel Premier Palace in 1917 and 18, we had an Ottoman embassy. Every day we are finding something new, sometimes political meaning, sometimes academic meaning. Of course, Crimean Tatars is a natural connection between us. And I think the same feeling is now developing slowly for Ukrainians residing in Antalya permanently. They have their choruses, they do their art events. So we are creating some spaces based on our mutual rich heritage.
Active interaction of the two countries at all levels leaves almost no free time. On weekends, a diplomat prefers to visit the Ukrainian-Turkish cultural event or discover a new region of Ukraine.
Free time is something which I don't like, to be honest, because whenever I find some free time, I try to discover something in Kyiv or try to go to another town in Ukraine to find what we have there. It's 9 months since I came to Ukraine. I already visited Lviv, I went to Odessa, I went down to Akerman and Izmail. Last weekend I was in Dnipro and Kryvyi Rih, trying to discover the places in Ukraine, meet our Turkish entrepreneurs. You cannot imagine, in every corner I see a Turkish business person doing business in. When we came in January, Kyiv was a very white city. We didn't understand why people were referring to it as a city of parks. But once the ice melted and snow disappeared, we understand how green it is. Kyiv, of course, it's a marvelous city. We love it. We love Ukraine in general, but since we're residing in Kiev, we have a special sympathy for Kiev. We are doing bike rides with the family in Feofania Park or in Mezhigiria. One thing that I love doing with my son is going to the matches of Dynamo Kiev, especially for the European Championship games. So we are actually enjoying Kiev very much, and we thank the Ukrainians for their hospitality.